Let's face it, it's hard to be a Cubs fan. And sometimes it's really, really hard to be a Cubs fan. There's always talk about wait until next year, or the future is coming. It's coming. It's coming. Well, the future has been coming since 1909. Da 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 da. Oh, go to Wrigley. It's a great experience. It's a losing experience. Any memories I have of Wrigley are always of the Cubs losing. It's just very frustrating to be a Cubs fan. And it's even more frustrating to be a Cubs fan in 2014 because while I understand and partially agree with the philosophy of needing to blow it up and tear it all apart and rebuild from the grassroots on up, because the team that was there a few years ago, make no mistake about it, was nowhere near a championship level contending team. We're now in year 3 of this massive rebuilding project, and it seems to be getting worse, not any better. We could talk about the prospects, and we talk about the prospects, but at some point in time, those prospects have to slowly start to make it up to the roster and actually be given a chance to do something, and they have to gel, and they have to fulfill that potential. Prospects can kill hopes and dreams and organizations, and I hope that's not what happens to the Cubs in the next few years here. But something else about the Cubs really bothers me and really aggravates me. And that is their decision to basically blackball one of the biggest stars in the history of their organization. Their decision to completely ostracize one of the biggest stars in recent times in the history of baseball. A man that was a star for a decade for this organization. A man that was one of the few reasons to actually want to watch a Cubs game for many years, if not the only reason. A man who was the pillar and building block for those Cubs teams of the late 90s and early 2000s that occasionally would actually contend and play well. And of course, I'm talking about one man, and that's Sammy Sosa. Now, I saw earlier this week where Theo Epstein and the Chicago Cubs have signed Manny Ramirez to be a player coach down at AAA. Well, isn't that fine and dandy? Now, let me get this straight. Manny being Manny, and I love me some Manny Ramirez. There is no question about it. He was a necessary component to what the Red Sox did for many, many years during the 2000s. One of the greatest free agent signings in the history of free agency, and don't get it twisted, he clearly was, because he was an organization changer for the Boston Red Sox and was a key part in them winning 2 World Series, helping break the curse of the Bambino. But when the Cubs recently had the 100th anniversary celebration for that toxic waste dump of a stadium of suck that is Wrigley Field, they invite all these legends and stars from the past, but one name is notably absent, and that's Sammy Sosa. Now, why do we hate Sammy Sosa so much, Cubs organization? Is it because of the way he left under a previous ownership group and a previous front office and general manager regime? Is it the fact of the cork bat? Is it the steroids? Is it this? Is it that? Is it his prima donna attitude? What the fuck is it? Because I look at all the stuff that a Sammy Sosa potentially brings to the table from a negative standpoint, and I say, well, what the fuck does that make Manny Ramirez, God bless him, a steroid user, prima donna attitude, and oh, by the way, unlike Sammy Sosa, who did a lot of great things for the Cubs organization for 11, 12 damn years, Manny Ramirez never did a damn thing for the Chicago Cubs. But yet Theo and Jed Hoyer are okay with bringing him into the fold and bringing him into the organization. But Sammy Sosa can't even make an appearance at the 100th anniversary of that toxic waste dump of a stadium, Wrigley Field, and needs to be blown to the damn ground where they build a new stadium where winning actually becomes the priority instead of this overwhelming sense of kumbaya, what a great environment. Let's get drunk by the 5th inning and forget about this organization sucking since 1908. And never winning a damn championship in 106 damn years. How ridiculous is it that one of the true greats of Chicago Cubs history, and maybe one of the true greats of all time with fleas, but he's still one of the true all-time greats in Sammy Sosa, Still doesn't have his number retired by the organization. Still isn't welcomed back by the organization in any way, shape, or form. Yet guys like Mark McGwire and Barry Bonds are welcomed back into the fold of baseball. Now, let's get our facts straight and let's have a little revisitation of history here, please, Chicago Cubs organization, and frankly, some of the Cubs fans. There was a period of time in the 90s where not only did the Cubs suck, a lot of people weren't going to games at that crappy stadium, Wrigley Field. And that is a fact. People really started coming back to the Cubs and coming back to enjoy the ambiance and the environment of Wrigley Field because Sammy Sosa brought them back to the fucking ballpark. Not people like Ryan Sandberg, not people like Mark Grace, not people like Andre Dawson, players that I love and admire tremendously. Some of my favorite Cubs, obviously, of all time. But there was one guy that stood out above the rest. One guy that was a star of stars for this organization, that really represented this Cubs organization for over a decade, was the reason that the Cubs became kind of a national brand and a national team. And that was Samuel Peralta Sosa. How dare we forget? All the talk about, like, Kerry Wood's 20 strikeout game in May of 1998 during that magical season. Do we need to remember that there were only like 20,000 people at the ballpark that day? The stadium and the stands started filling up later in that season when Sosa had his 20 home run month and he was chasing McGwire and Roger Maris's freaking home run record. We forget about that crap, though. You know, sometimes, yes, our heroes are flawed, and Sammy Sosa is a flawed individual and a flawed hero. But he's still one of my heroes as a child and even as an adult watching baseball. You know, this to me, where older Cub fans have people like Ron Santo and Billy Williams and Ferguson Jenkins and Ron Santo. Sammy Sosa was my guy. Sammy Sosa, to me, represented the Chicago Cubs. Sammy Sosa, keep in mind, eventually led to them hiring Dusty Baker, bringing Sammy Sosa in via trade, trading for him, getting rid of George Bell, was one of the best moves the organization ever made, frankly. Because they had Sammy Sosa, it got to a point in time where people realized that, hey, this is one of the true stars of professional baseball. And it actually finally put pressure on that stupid-ass Tribune company and the freaking ownership and front office of the Chicago Cubs to stop playing it cheap and start actually spending some damn money and putting priority and emphasis on trying to, God forbid, actually build a championship, contending team around Sammy Sosa. Because they didn't want him to go down in history the same way that other greats like Ernie Banks and Billy Williams and Ron Santo did. They didn't want him to be remembered as a great star and a great player on crappy teams. And now here it is in 2014. Sammy Sosa has been gone from the organization for a decade. We could bring in another steroid cheat like Manny Ramirez, who won world championships, newsflash, dumb dicks like Theo Epstein, for another organization. And we can't even welcome back Sammy Sosa. We can't even acknowledge or embrace all the great things that he did. We can't sit there and remember him as one of the true great stars in Chicago Cubs history. We can't remember him and tip our hat to him and say, you know what? He brought relevance back to the Chicago Cubs. He brought fans back to the Chicago Cubs. He brought exposure and interest to the Chicago Cubs that hadn't been there in freaking years. We forget about all this crap, though. You know, all the front office battles over the years over his salary. Sammy Sosa was worth every dollar that he fucking got and then some to the Chicago Cubs. Whoopee! $72 million over 4 years or whatever the hell it was. He was worth 2 to 3 times that based off of the box office and other impact that he had on the organization. To me, it is a crying shame that a decade after he last played for the Chicago Cubs, that there hasn't been a Sammy Sosa day, that he hasn't been welcomed back with open arms to Wrigley Field, that he hasn't had his jersey retired, that he hasn't been brought back to sing that stupid seventh inning stretch song. At some point in time, don't you think that's necessary? At some point in time, don't you think, Cubs organization, that's the right thing to do? And for some of you Cubs fans that seem to have forgotten, maybe it's time you take a step back and you really think about what a Sammy Sosa meant to that organization for so many damn years. Forget the steroids crap, because if Sammy Sosa would have won a World Series or two, if that 2003 team would have won it all, you sure as hell wouldn't give a shit. And don't tell me that you fucking would. Because you could see the reaction to guys like Johnny Damon and Manny Ramirez and Big Papi Ortiz in Boston when they recently celebrated the 10th anniversary, or it was a 10-year reunion for the 2004 championship team. You know damn good and well if Sammy Sosa would have won a World Series or two in Chicago, they'd name streets after him. His jersey already would have been retired, and people would sit there and defend him to the fucking nth degree. Well, I'm not going to turn my back on one of my favorite baseball players of all time. I'm not going to turn my back on one of the greatest Chicago Cubs of all time. I'm not going to turn my back on one of the great stars of professional baseball of my lifetime. You can't sit there and reap all the rewards and then sit there and turn a blind eye and a nose to him because he got caught or he got caught up in this. No, bullshit. You're going to ride with him, you got to die with him too. Let's hope that someday the Cubs organization, the Cubs front office, Cubs ownership, some Cubs fans, frankly, come to their senses and realize that time heals all wounds, and there is a point in time where it needs to happen. They need to bring back Sammy Sosa to the organization, make him a part of the organization, even if it's from a little bit of a distance. He needs to have a Sammy Sosa day. He needs to have his jersey retired because at the end of the day, he earned it. He deserved it. And you're robbing him. You're robbing yourself as an organization. You're robbing us as fans of that opportunity to reflect and remember and say thank you. It's sad. They can bring in Manny Ramirez, but they can't bring in Sammy Sosa. What a crock.